We can't talk about anything else about becoming a better bike rider until you've got that ability to turn ideas into habits. The doorstep mile is that simple idea that you're going to actually live out your thoughts. You're going to do it. You're going to commit to the important bits. You're going to get out of bed a little bit earlier and ride your bike, because that sense of self-worth that comes with riding our bike, whether it's, actually to be competitive or just to have fun, it's all about converting ideas into reality. Do you actually do it, or are you just thinking it?
Welcome to the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast. I'm Matthew Piaro, and joining me for this episode is Matt Hansen. How's it going, Matt?
Again with this episode. I'm on every episode.
Okay, but maybe one episode you're going to be on a trip, and I'll have to say, what, am I going to say Matt Hansen's not here today?
I think that would be adequate.
All right, well, Terry's not here.
Yeah, but Terry's just mercurial. He's here sometimes, he's not,
I know, it's hard to nail that guy down. Anyway, Matt Hansen is here, everybody. Welcome, Matt.
Hello.
See what I did there?
Mm-hmm.
People do that with my name, too.
Yeah, we're all named Matt.
We're all named Matt here at Canadian Cycling Magazine, except for Terry. On this episode, I have an interview with someone who's not named Matt. His name is Mark Beaumont. You probably know him from his many GCN Plus documentaries. He does these far out rides, adventures, straight up adventures, like climbing the world's highest volcano with a bike on his back and then free riding all the way down. And he also holds the record for circumnavigation of the globe. He's got the fastest number there, which is 78 days, 14 hours, and 40 minutes.
I just think pain when I think of that. Yeah, everything would hurt.
That's what I think too. But we are going to talk not just pain, but psychology with Mark Beaumont, because he has a recent book out about cycling and psychology, and we're going to delve into that and how it can help everyday riders like you and me, Matt.
Okay, let's go ride around the world. Can you imagine that? We would kill each other on the first day. Not literally. No, maybe literally.
Then we'd really need some psychological analysis. But before my conversation with Mark Beaumont, there's some great racing going on right now and some great racing that has just wrapped up. The Giro d'Italia is on, a little race in Italy.
I once heard a story that Andy Hampson, when he won the Tour of Italy, he was so humble on the flight home. Everyone knows the Tour of Italy, obviously, in Italy. An American lady said, "Oh, what were you doing in Italy?" He said, "Oh, I was just doing a little bike tour." Didn't mention he won it. Just a little touring on my bike.
And like he had that brutal stage in the snow he could barely brake going down the mountain.
The Gavia.
Little tour. There is a Canuck in the race, Derek G. He continues to just build his experience quite rapidly in the pro peloton. He was tapped to do his first Grand Tour, the Giro d'Italia, and we have plans to connect with Derek after the race, after the little tour of Italy.
I really like his national championship skin suit, by the way. It's done. You know how I have very strong opinions on these things? I think it's done nicely.
And what do you like about it?
Well, it's just, it retains like the original design, which sometimes people go a little stylistic, and I don't think you should. Maggie's is also great, but yeah, it looks good. Classic.
There you go. It gets the seal of approval from Matt Hansen.
I'm sure he cares.
What would Matt Hansen think of this skin suit?
Oh no.
Also, wrapping up recently was the Vuelta Femenina, and that race was crazy. That
last stage, man.
Well, the last stage, and then stage 6 with the infamous P break.
Never attack on a P break.
Well, here's the thing. Movistar says, okay, SD Works, Demi Vollering, and I think it was 4 of her teammates took a nature break. And I believe there's also a puncture involved for someone in there, or maybe a 5th rider. And then that coincided with an attack by Movistar and Annemiek van Vleuten's team. Movistar maintains that was the plan all along. They know the roads. They knew that would be the time to go. And then SD Works cried foul on that, as in it was disrespectful.
Yeah, well, history's written by the winners, right? So we'll never know.
Oof.
Oof. Well, she almost lost it there. I mean, I think Van Vleuten lost like a minute in that last stage. I think she only won by 9 seconds. So that could have been karma.
And because we're Canadian Cycling Magazine, we have noted that Olivia Barrel did quite well in that race. On the 6th stage, she finished in the same group as Demi Vollering and Kasia Nimadoma. I think the race was a bit of a bummer for her. On the last stage, she was caught up in a crash and she fell in the GC. I'm trying to remember. Oh, yes, she had got as high as 6 in the general classification.
But I think this is exciting for her for Grand Tours and other big races. It looks like she's just getting better every year.
I wonder if this is where overexcited editors start writing things like Canada's best hope for a Grand Tour win.
Yeah, let's just wait. Let's just be cool. Let's see what tomorrow brings.
No, I want the spicy headline.
Okay. I don't really believe in spicy headlines. I like being kind of, sophisticated.
Oh my gosh, this is... and once again, you say something that makes steam issue from my headphones. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to reveal that Mr. Hansen writes some pretty spicy headlines on our website.
Only when it's spicy material.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're just a paragon of restraint. I forgot about that.
Yeah, professional at all times.
Professional at all times. Okay.
I'm just going to crack open a beer now. Give me 1 second.
What else is news? Yeah, I had a lovely trip. Thank you.
Oh, how was your trip?
Yeah, thanks.
I didn't even notice you were gone.
Yeah, well, in order to do that, you need to show up to the office and also read the occasional email.
Okay. How was your trip to Colorado?
Oh, it was good. It was really good. I was in Boulder and surrounding area because Rab, who many cyclists may not be familiar with this brand, but the climbers, the mountaineers know it because Rab they make this almost $2,000 snowsuit for when you're on top of Mount Everest. They make really great puffies that I've nicked from our sibling magazine, Gripped. And they're now into gravel cycling clothing. So I was testing that out on some gravel around Rab HQ North America.
Those rides looked incredible, by the way. Those rides you're on Instagram. Oh.
We live in a very flat part of North America, you and I.
I know.
And I wasn't meant to cycle in a flat part of the world. So I was happier than a pig in, what's the expression? A pig in mud.
Mud, yeah.
Mud.
That's the expression.
Going up some of those climbs just west of Boulder.
But they almost look like fire roads, kind of like in California.
Some of them were just simply dirt roads to very nice houses in not the mountains, but the foothills. They seemed like mountains to me. But yeah, the riding was spectacular. And there's also some single track where I was consistently chirped by prairie dogs.
Yeah, they suck.
I don't know. They're cute, and they get out of the way seemingly just in time.
Until cut to.
Thankfully, it didn't come to that. But anyway, the kit was compelling. After listeners, you're done listening to this episode, you can read about it on our website. And yeah, that was testing clothing. We've got lots of bikes. It's May, and that's definitely May if you are in our office and see the number of bikes littering the place right now.
There's that very cool Trek Fetch cargo bike, which I'm kind of excited to try that out on the streets of Toronto. I
know. It's huge. We were joking that maybe I could sit in the back and you could drive me around.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm actually, I blow the weight limit on it.
Well.
It's whatever. It is what it is. It's not meant for adults. You can fit 2 kids in the back that, as long as those 2 little ones are less than 80 pounds a pop. But one person at 160 pounds is not cool. You cannot do that.
Puppies would be okay. Those prairie dogs, just scoop them up and throw them in there.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Because there's a lot of prairie dogs in Toronto.
There are not. Would your cats ride in the back?
No, because I don't let my cats come out of my house because the world is horrible. They stay inside. They're indoor cats.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're more of a helicopter parent than I am.
I'm a helicopter cat dad. I don't know what happened to me. I was cool once, and now I have an Instagram with my cats. I don't know how, and all these people post photos of their cats, and they all talk to each other like they're cats. I don't know. That's a whole other podcast. I don't talk to other people like my cat. I just post photos of him because he's cute.
There you go. And last on the testing stable is an Argon 18 Krypton. And that actually brings us back to Mark Beaumont, who consulted on the construction, the design, let's say, of the new Krypton, which is a pretty cool bike.
Mm-hmm. It looks nice.
Yeah. Maybe you'll get to ride it when I'm done with it.
I haven't ridden an Argon. Well, no, I've ridden an Argon here, actually, a couple new ones, but they sure look nice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you've ridden the Gray Matter.
Mm-hmm. And also I rode one in 2002, but that was been a while.
They've moved on since then.
Yeah. But did they win the national, not me, but under our good friend Andrew Randall, he won the national championships on one, but that was a long time ago.
I do talk Argon bikes with Mark Beaumont near the end of our conversation. But before that, there is lots of meaty discussion about the mind of a cyclist, of pushing yourself, and the mental toolbox that every cyclist needs. And even though Mark does these, like I say, far out adventures, there are lessons for everyone who just maybe wants to ride a little bit faster, a little bit better, and improve their game. And you can do that all with the stuff between your ears.
This will be helpful to you, for sure.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, everyone, let's hear from Mark Beaumont. Mark Beaumont, your recent book that you've written with sports psychologist Jim Taylor is The Complete Guide to Cycling Psychology. It says on the cover that it's every rider's mental toolkit. Some examples of mental tools for cyclists are goal setting, self-talk, emotional mastery, and even breathing and smiling. Before we delve deeper into this toolbox, I want to remind listeners that you hold a world record for circumnavigating the world and for riding the length of Africa solo. You've done many other holy cow type endurance adventures. In light of these achievements, I'm wondering if you, Mark Beaumont, have more tools in your mental toolkit than most riders.
Hey, that's a good starter, isn't it? Do I have more? Maybe I've worked on my mental toolkit more than most. I have never assumed that I'm the best technical rider, I'm the strongest rider, I'm the most physically able rider. I'm a really tall guy. I weigh over 90 kilos. I don't look like a traditional bike rider. You know, here in the UK, I look more like a rugby player than a bike rider. So, I mean, I guess I've never been arrogant enough to say that I'll win the race or break the record because I'm physically more able. I'm a huge student of the mental discipline, the ability to suffer, which I know sounds a bit weird, but ultimately the importance of psychology, especially in the world of ultra endurance. I can stand on the start line of an event and I can look around me and go, do you know what? There's riders with better FTP, there's better riders with better aerodynamics, but I can out-suffer most of you. And I think that quiet confidence that gives you, the ability to know yourself, is so important as a bike rider.
So then maybe is it confidence, which is one of the mental toolbox tools? Maybe that one came to you naturally, or did you have to work on that one as well?
I think confidence comes in different forms, because people look at somebody like me, you know, on television. You know, you can switch on Global Cycling Network and see these major record-breaking projects and think, wow, you know, that guy's just got immense self-confidence. But like anyone in any walk of life, we don't need to be talking about bike riders here. You know, I've got the same insecurities, imposter syndromes, uncertainties, good days at training, awful days at training. And so I think it's really important to realize how I see myself, not how other people see me as somebody in the media. Because when you look at me in the media, you see the results, you see the success, you see the outcomes. You don't see the process. You don't see all the hundreds and hundreds of hours that go behind it, the setbacks and the rest of it. I think a really important context to this is I was homeschooled until I was 12. And so I didn't go into a playground or a school environment until I was into almost my teenage years. So I missed all those formative experiences where you jostle for position. There's a hierarchy in sport and, you become a team player. I never did that. I was a kid on a farm with my two sisters. And I think what that gave me is a huge sense of, a good work ethic, because I was out working on the farm every day. And it gave me I was very comfortable in my own skin, but I was terrible at adversarial competition. I was terrible at any confrontations. I even today, when somebody pulls up next to me at the stop sign and says, "I'll race you. You're Mark Beaumont. I'll race you." I'm still the little kid that goes, "No, you got this." I hate the alpha type competition. I'm a terrible competitor when it comes to having the confidence to try and beat other people. What I've specialized in my whole career is being fiercely competitive with myself. And that's a different sort of competition. So I think it's interesting when I say to people, look, I'm not the best bike rider in Edinburgh. I'm not the best bike rider in the UK. And so the ability to consistently over the last 20 years, not just break world records, but create these massive leaps in performance that I have with my teams is because of our ability to plan, our great strength as a team, as a collective, not just me as a bike rider, and ultimately that quiet confidence to really sort of deliver what we think is possible. I still hate it in a Grand Fondo or a race in that sense of like, I'm not blissfully confident. It's a different thing, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I'm wondering if there's a mental tool where a rider just getting started out in cycling should look to building first. Like, where's the first mental tool that I should pick up if I'm a beginner?
So the first important mental tool is about, I guess, let's be really, really simple. It's about the doorstep mile. So the doorstep mile is that very simple concept that we all like the idea of going on bike rides, helping our well-being, creating great memories with our friends. Ultimately, riding a bike, being a bike rider it comes down to how your identity, who you are as a person, how you see yourself in the world and your community, your friendship groups. But I've got lots of buddies who identify as bike riders. They just don't actually ride their bikes very much. And when it comes to actually becoming a better bike rider, you've got to have the discipline and the routine to actually turn the idea of what you want to be into your habit. So the doorstep mile is that idea of when you look out the door and you go, oh, it's just hard to get started. For whatever reason, I'm time poor, the family's calling for me, it's raining, it's dark, whatever reason you've got to not get on your bike and ride and get the training in or whatever. But you never regret it. And realizing that you never regret it, the only thing that's hard to build the habit of is making the commitment, not just having the idea, but making the commitment. I see it all the time with athletes, amateur and professional, where it's just having that discipline where there's a bit of a void between how you see yourself and the life you actually lead. And you've got a very simple choice in that situation. You either change your goals and make them more realistic, or you change your habits. And I think we can't talk about anything else in the book or about becoming a better bike rider until you've got that ability to turn ideas into habits. The doorstep mile is that simple idea that you're going to actually live out your thoughts. You're going to do it. You're going to commit to the important bits. You're going to get out of bed a little bit earlier and ride your bike, because that sense of self-worth that comes with riding our bike, whether it's, actually to be competitive or just to have fun, it's all about converting ideas into reality. Do you actually do it, or are you just thinking it?
Tell me how you connected with Jim Taylor, your co-author for the Complete Guide to Cycling Psychology.
Dr. Jim Taylor. I say Dr. Jim Taylor because I made that mistake the first time I spoke to him, and it was one of those funny conversations. It's Dr. Jim Taylor. He's a great buddy now. He's a great guy, but he always reminds me it's Dr. Jim Taylor.
All right, Dr. Jim.
Exactly. Jim's a great buddy. He's a hugely well-respected sports psychologist, not just in cycling, but in triathlon, alpine skiing. He's worked across elite sports throughout his career. He lives in Northern California. He's an age group triathlete. He's super credible. And what I loved working with Jim was he brought a language and clearly a scientific credibility that I don't have. I've got the anecdotes. I've lived it, but I didn't know how to. I wouldn't have been able to have this conversation, this podcast a year ago, because I just didn't have a way of explaining what I do. I was fascinated in psychology, but I didn't actually know how to articulate it. And writing the book with Jim felt like a sort of a 6-7 month, psychology session with the great man. I just got to know myself so much better. How I met him was because a few years previously, I wrote another book called Endurance. It was also a publication for Global Cycling Network, but Endurance was basically the complete toolkit for everything you might need to know, nutrition, bike fit, training, you name it. And psychology was just one of the chapters. And I actually ran a podcast series with the contributors to the book. So I reached out to not necessarily the elite athletes, but the people who sat behind the athletes, the unsung heroes, people who were super credible in their field, but didn't necessarily have the limelight or the results because they sat behind the athletes. So I found the best, sports nutritionist that I could find, the best bike fitter, the best. And I reached out to Dr. Jim Taylor because I really appreciated his work. I really liked the way he communicated what he did. And I asked him to be a contributor to the book Endurance. When Endurance did really well as a publication and GCN came back and said, that was amazing. I wrote that with Laura Penhall, my performance manager. What if you were to write another book, what would it be? And I said, I would take that chapter, that one chapter, psychology, and I would make it a book because there is so much more to explore. There's so much that's, everyone spends what they can on expensive bikes and, bangs on about training in a physical sense. But, the untapped resource in terms of our physical competence, our resilience, our emotions, that's rarely trained in the same way. So it was as simple as that. Like, there is an amazing book to be told here, but I don't have the skill set to do it. So I reached out to Jim and I said, look, do you know that conversation we had in that amazing chapter in the book? Let's do a deep dive and make it into something much bigger.
You mentioned the different contributions that you have in the book and that Dr. Jim Taylor has. You have the anecdotes and he has the analysis. And it's the analysis of your anecdotes. He pulls out some psychological insight from them. How did it feel when your experiences were parsed by Dr. Taylor? Did you feel like you were on a metaphorical couch talking to a head shrinker?
Often, yes. And we had a number of conversations where he said exactly that. Like, this feels like a private sort of client conversation. Are you happy for it to go in the book? And, the answer was almost always yes. I'm private about elements of my family life, but when it comes to my professional career as a bike rider and the highs and lows therein and the mistakes I've made, sure, I'm very happy to share them. And, I've been lucky's a bit glib. I've worked incredibly hard, but I've been lucky to work with some brilliant people in my career. And I've got to take on my biggest dreams as a bike rider. And there's not many people who get the opportunity to look back at their cycling career and say, I really did get to take on my biggest dreams. So if I can sort of pay that forwards, if I can in some way better understand what's given me those opportunities and help other people. Now, it doesn't need to be about cycling around the world or, riding your bike over 100 countries. It can simply be about, as an amateur rider with your buddies, even as a commuter, just better understanding yourself, being in the present, understanding why you do what you do. I just think it's interesting. I mean, when people meet me at events, I think they're interested in what I'm saying and the adventures I take them on. But ultimately, people are interested in themselves. You live life with one eye in the mirror and you're thinking, I'm interested in you because it in some way gives a reference point to my own ambitions and the things I do and want to do. And it doesn't need to be competitive, but there's a kinship with that. And I'm acutely aware that when I write books, even about adventures, that whilst people are absorbed in the wanderlust and the culture and the people and the place, I think people are always sort of, even if it's as an armchair adventurer, thinking about their own interests in the world. And I think that's such a useful thing to remember when you do have a public profile, when you are a broadcaster. It's not just about you and sort of building a profile for your brand and your story. You've got this amazing responsibility to sort of pass it on in a way which makes sense to people. So I never try to stand up and go, wow, we're over here in the elite sort of adventure record breaking world. And, I try to make it as accessible and relevant as possible, in the hope. The best feedback I ever get is when people come to me and say, I did this because I read your book, or I came to your talk, or I saw your thing, and you gave me that quiet confidence. And it's normally something that they wanted to do anyway. I wasn't coaching them. I wasn't telling them how to do it. I was just simply helping them prioritize it and unlock that potential. That, as a human being, is the best feedback that anyone can ever give.
Dr. Taylor writes that a cyclist should treat training of the mind in the same way as training the body. To run with that idea, can a mind become detrained like the body? Or maybe, to use another metaphor, do mental tools need to be honed again and again?
I think we are creatures of habit. So just like physical training as a habit prepares you for the event that you're training towards, having the right sort of mental toolkit is clearly important to cope with whatever's thrown at you. Can you become detrained? Of course you can, because you cannot turn up at those big life-fulfilling, career-defining moments and expect to just magic up the resilience, the correct emotional response. You have to have done something in your life's experience to prepare yourself for that, to understand how you cope, how you think, how you communicate, and how you operate under stress. And people don't like to talk about bike riding as stress, but actually it's the human condition. We're at our best when we're striving. We ride a bike because we actually enjoy doing something which is challenging, even if it is with a tailwind and the sun is shining and things are going well. It's still harder than sitting on your sofa watching Netflix. So we do a bike ride because it gives a sense of fulfillment. It's the application of energy and mind and all that good stuff. So I think your question is a great one, because it's about how, and I don't think it's a case of, right, I've put in my training peaks that I need to do 90 minutes on the turbo today, and then afterwards I'm going to do 90 minutes sat there in a Zen position, meditating. And that's not what we're talking about here. It's actually having the self-reflection whilst you're training to be able to understand yourself better, realize your reactions, almost be, zooming out from your own situation and go, okay, I'm in that situation and that's how I reacted. Maybe I could choose to react differently, or, something's happened, and just being self-aware enough to be able to adjust your behaviors. It's amazing. Take a simple example. Like, do you know how many people are sort of scared of night riding because they've never done it before? They seem to think that when you switch the lights out, it becomes harder to ride your bike. Like, it must be so hard to ride your bike at 3, 4, 5 in the morning. Well, if you get familiar with that environment, if you're used to riding through the night and you're used to understanding how your circadian rhythm affects your mood, how your appetite changes as you're meant to be asleep, you normalize it. You become better at coping with that. And I always say, in ultra endurance racing, you don't win at midday, you win at midnight. I don't care how good you are when things are going well, when everyone else is alert and ready. It's how you cope when you're in the unfamiliar part of the race. Now, I know we're not just talking about ultra endurance here, but it's about understanding yourself well enough when you're in stressful situations to be able to sort of normalize it and have a wry smile and go, I'm there again. I know my go-tos. I know what goes right and what goes wrong in these situations, and acting appropriately.
I've heard you speak of the performance mindset and a positive mindset. Can you contrast those two outlooks between the performance mindset and a positive mindset?
Yeah, so in a lot of sports coaching and a lot of business coaching, people talk about, developing a positive mindset and growth mindset, and you need to be better than you were yesterday. And this is all about just being more, happy. And I say that sort of glibly because I just don't think that's particularly realistic or human. At 4 o'clock in the morning, when the storm's raging outside, when I'm sleep deprived and things are going badly, don't tell me to be happy. Don't tell me to be positive. Don't tell me even about, that far off goal, because I'm quite often negatively motivated. I'm quite often scared of failure. I'm quite often really sort of in a dark place, but knowing that what I do next matters the most. So I think it's not human to be utterly happy, clappy, cheery, high fives and inspirational quotes all day long. I think if you do that, it's not a good thing for your mental health. I think it's good to acknowledge that life's a roller coaster. Every day we have highs and lows. Every week and month and year, there'll be setbacks in your training. And I think you need to acknowledge those things as just part of that human condition and part of the journey, to use that overused phrase. So I don't think you should put yourself under this incessant pressure, this sort of growth mindset idea that you're never good enough. You've always got to strive for betterment, because I think that stops people being in the moment and appreciating who they are and the opportunities they've got. And I think lifelong learning is important, and wanting to continue to improve what you do is fundamentally a unique part of being human. Unlike dogs don't think that. They don't think I need to be a better dog than I was today. But I think at the heart of all these conversations, you have to have kindness. You have to have kindness to yourself and your fellow athletes if you're a coach, because to continue to be interested in becoming a better bike rider, you've got to acknowledge that there's highs and lows, good days, bad days, setbacks, and you've just got to accept it. You've got to accept it and find a mindset that you can keep going, which is why I'm a much better fan of a performance mindset. A performance mindset is simply saying what I do matters. What I think matters. I have a choice in my reaction. So the things that happen to me, I might not have complete control over, but how I react is completely within my control. So a performance mindset is around accountability. So it's not being happy, clappy, cheery, and ridiculously positive all the time. It's acknowledging that you're in the driving seat. And I always say to my athletes, I say, if you can remember when the chips are down or when things are going well, the only thing that matters is how you choose to react. And you won't always get it right, but have that responsibility around your own behavior. It's nobody else's fault. It's yours. And I think that gives people a far better emotional even keel. And it ultimately reminds people that they're human. We're not ridiculously happy, clappy, positive, optimistic all the time. And I think that's okay.
That idea of being happy, clappy, and optimistic makes me think of another tool in the toolkit. And I bring it up not to try to catch you out in a paradox maybe, but one of these tools is smiling. And to me, that struck me as I was reading your book. I'm like, okay, smiling? And maybe you can unpack the nature of the smile as a tool in the toolbox in a genuine way, and not in this sort of, I think if I read you correctly, not in this way of, just be positive, just turn that frown upside down. Like there's something else going on here with the smile, if you can maybe unpack that a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people, when they're on the bike, are controlled by their emotions. And I think the first thing I would say, which is not a direct answer to what you've just said, is as a first response when things start to go downhill on the bike, is a psychological crash is normally quite often linked to a nutritional crash. So if things start to go downhill, eat something. And I know that sounds incredibly simple and you don't need to buy a book for that, but a psychological crash is almost always in some way related to a nutritional or hydration mistake. So eat something, drink something. Your specific question around smiling. So if you're riding up a massive climb, Alpe d'Huez, you shouldn't lie to yourself. You shouldn't say, be happy. If you're suffering, you're suffering. So I think the things you say to yourself, that self-talk is fundamentally important. So, you can sort of invoke the inner hero, can't you? Now, it's not good to do it out loud. You start to sound like a bit of an idiot, but it's okay in terms of your self-talk to sort of have the inner heroics of why you're doing it and the values therein, So you're battling, you're a warrior, it's worth it. It's incredibly tough, but you know what? This is the good stuff. This is what I ride a bike for. And my goodness, this is going to be a memory that lasts a lifetime. I think that reframing, because if you just got into a place of complete despair and didn't have a relevant vocabulary to sort of reframe it as, something worthwhile, I think you'd really struggle. You just give up. So the smiling thing is kind of an extension of that. When I can think of many times in races where I've been, in a pretty desperate place, physical pain, weather conditions, whatever it is. And if you've got the ability to have a wry smile, to have a real sort of it's very hard to even if you don't sort of feel it in terms of actually what you're facing is incredibly difficult. If you have the ability to have a wry smile and almost that sort of watch yourself in that situation, I think it has an amazing ability for you to sort of ride the road in front of you, as opposed to think of the big picture. I always think that most people quit races not because... I'll give you a very quick example. A couple of years ago, I raced GB Duro. You might remember a 2,000 kilometre gravel race, the length of the UK. Lachlan Morton won it the first year. Josh Ibbott won it the second year. I won it the third year. So the year I took part, 60 people started and 13 finished. 13. So 47 people didn't quit because their bikes broke. 47 people quit because they, at some point along that 2,000 kilometre road, stopped riding the road in front of them. Now, I would argue that they probably didn't quit because they couldn't make it to their next horizon. They quit because the idea of the length of that road, the never-endingness of it, became too much. So it's the road you can't see that makes you give up. So that idea of sort of smiling and being in the moment is just simply having the discipline to realize that if you're in a tough place, the only thing, if things are really tough, you'll get through it. You just need to stay on your bike and ride the road in front of you. There's something you learn in ultra endurance, which I think is really interesting. When you're just starting out in this game, there's this assumption that if you're sore and you keep riding, you're going to get more sore. If you're tired and you don't sleep, you're going to get more tired. And the wonderful thing you learn is actually the mind and the body has an amazing ability to rebound. I've been in so many situations where I've just been in a world of pain or I've been sleep deprived beyond doubt, and I just couldn't see how I would see through it. And you think, well, I'm just on a race to fail. And honestly, you just need to keep riding the road in front of you. Not just will the situation change, but the way you perceive that situation will change. And there's this incredible roller coaster. So when things are going well, they'll get worse. When things are going badly, they'll get better. And the only thing that you can rely on is that change. And you have to trust in the process and not get too lost in the bit over the horizon.
It's the road you can't see that makes you give up or that makes you fail. That's a nice turn of phrase. It's very philosophical. And you almost want to put that on your top tube, but maybe not.
I should have thought about it before I wrote the book. But yeah, I think the idea is in there.
It is definitely. It's definitely in there. There's a phrase on your top tube, or occasionally on your top tube. What is that phrase?
I've had a few. I think the one you're probably thinking about is TTC, time to commit.
Exactly. That's the one that I remember reading from the book. And for listeners in Toronto here, they'll probably think of our public transit system. But time to commit is actually a better thing to put on your top tube than Toronto Transit Commission.
It's funny, actually, because it's become a bit of a running joke. I'm looking over at my bike that's sitting on the turbo right now, and it's got it written on the top tube. It works for me. It's that sort of time to commit sort of keeps you in the moment, just keep disciplined, ride your bike, ride the road in front of you. But I also, it's become a running joke because it's obviously one that irritates my buddies because it came off a Pro-Am race that I did in the Alps about 10 years ago. So I was the pro, I was leading a team of amateurs. And I would use this often when we were racing big climbs and we would get like a third of the way up and I was pushing them hard and I would turn around and say, time to commit. And they would turn around and say, look, buddy, we committed half an hour ago. We're all in. And it's that sense of just turning the dial a little bit and saying to your friends, right, okay, now's the moment you need to go deep. And they always turn around and go, look, we've been in the red for the last half hour. Don't just, it's become a running joke.
Right. And it's like, that's the phrase that resonates with you. But for these other people, it's just like, oh, come on, man. Like, you've got to stop that.
Yeah. But it's always done in good banter. It's always done in the sense of like, Mark's a bit of a taskmaster. We need to keep up with him. It's just in a great sense of sort of camaraderie as well as just sort of gently pushing people to the next level.
But what fascinates me is like, that's the phrase that works for you. I think I heard you in another interview say, don't give me some Muhammad Ali quote, because in that sense, you meant like, what I took that to mean is not that you have anything against Muhammad Ali, but it's just that, a phrase that is a stock phrase maybe, or a well-worn phrase is not going to connect with you. It's not going to actually make you focus or do whatever you need it to do. You need the phrase that works for you.
Yeah, and I think what I probably meant, it goes back to your question around positive and performance. Mm-hmm. So when the chips are down, don't give me a sort of an irrelevant inspirational quote. It doesn't. Time to commit is very specific. It's like, be in the moment, control what you can control. What you do now matters. It's very specific. Time to commit. If you're in a tough place, don't ease off and think, I'll try later when things get easier. What you do now matters. Time to commit is very specific. What I don't want is for people just to say, be ridiculously happy and cheery and put a smile on your face, because that's not relevant when you're battling, when you're having a tough time as a bike rider. So I think it's the same point. Be relevant, be present, ride your bike, and be consistent. And I think, people often talk about type 2 fun. It matters. When you're sitting with your buddies in the pub, you're not talking about the days when everything went well. You're talking about those stories, those times where you got to live out your biggest dreams and you learned something about yourself. So I'm not telling you to go out and, beat yourself up. It makes us sound a bit crazy, but I am saying that, we're at our best when we've got something to fight for, when we're at some level struggling, and that is not a negative statement. That is simply the human condition. When people retire and try to do nothing with their lives, they become fundamentally unhappy and often unhealthy. So be busy, be focused, be relevant, be present. I think that's the reminder here, as opposed to, distract yourself, be ridiculously cheery all the time. I guess that's at the heart of this sentiment.
You mentioned the idea of being present, and I want to, this is going to come around to that idea, but you not only do you take on big cycling adventures, you do speaking engagements, and you are a partner at a venture capital company. You also have a family. Based on all that, I assumed, before reading your book, that you must be a talented multitasker. Yet, in the book, you write that you are a proud single tasker. But I figured surely as you tick over kilometer after kilometer, maybe on the road or on the trainer, maybe you work on a presentation somewhere in there? Because, you've got tons of time.
The simple answer is, I'm a big fan of only doing what only I can do. It looks from my biography like I never sleep. That's not true. I've got an amazing young family. I work incredibly hard. I've got two big focuses in my career, and one to be the best endurance athlete that I can be, and the other to run a really impact focused venture capital business, scaling companies that are trying to address key global issues. So things like climate change, food and water security, quality of life. So these are really purposeful investments. So I'm a big fan of having the right team, and as I say, only doing what only I can do. So to train to the level that I do, I have to, when I went around the world in 80 days, I had 40 people working on my team. In the day job, if you like, in the venture capital business, again, there's a reasonable sized team around me. So I get way too much credit for what is a collective effort. And I'm incredibly proud of a lot of what my teams have done, both on the investment side and the athletic side over the last 20 plus years. But, I'm just the public profile part of that.
I guess to switch it over to another cycling idea, there's one winner of the Tour de France, but that winner has a team supporting him. So in this sense, you are the figurehead of the team that's behind you.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about the thing I'm best known for, I've cycled around the planet twice, which is a 27,000 kilometer race. Lots of people have said, oh, I want to have a go at that. I want to have a crack at that. And I look at them and I go, yeah, you could probably beat me. You're probably a better bike rider. But that is one small part of the puzzle. Honestly, the logistics involved, the finance involved, how to actually pull off something of that scale and that complex, a 27,000 kilometer race over 2.5 months. If you've got the right FTP, power to weight ratio, you can ride your bike fast and far. Great. I can think of lots of people who are technically better bike riders than me. But I think people spend way too much time focusing on that when it comes to ultra endurance and not nearly enough time on all the other skill sets. And people have often said to me over the years, people who have broken some of my records, why am I not given the same legacy, the same growth business, the same opportunities you have in your career? And I always say to them, if that is your wish, if that is your want in life, and it doesn't need to be, you can just ride your bike if you want. But if you want to do this professionally and build a career out of it, that is a completely different skill set than being a strong bike rider. So if it's important to you, then you need to focus on it equally and build a team around you. And so I think people are slightly surprised when they, for example, cycle around the world, break the record, get their moment in the press, and then what? Nothing happens. So I've purposefully built a career in the way I have. It's not what everyone would want to do, through acknowledging the breadth of skill sets that it takes to do that, because these things mattered to me. But for those who are just focused on riding their bikes, and I realize that for those listening to this podcast, it probably won't apply to you. You're riding your bike for fun. You're doing it as an amateur. You don't need to build a business. But I've faced criticism in my career for how professionally I've taken it. People saying, oh, it should just be, a bit more, a bit more wild man, a bit more adventure, a bit more amateurville. You just fall out of bed and do these things. This idea of having commercial sponsors and having a growth business and having big broadcasters involved. And I always say, look, I take my career as seriously as, I don't know what sports references make sense in Canada. Over here, I would say like Andy Murray, or this has been my life's work, and I take it incredibly seriously. And I think, especially in the adventure world, there's some people that have gone, hang on a second, that's a different take. Like, it's okay if you're doing that in the Tour de France, but to have taken these records to the degree that I have, the last time I broke the world record, I took 37% off it. We're not out there to break other people's records. We're out there to take things to a whole other level. And that level of professionalism and, quite a business approach to it has I guess been quite different from how other people have done it, which is fine, but I make no apologies.
I want to return to the idea of focus, and maybe you can tell me what you're focusing on as you ride around 380 kilometers a day as you circumnavigate the world, or maybe as you climb to the top of Ojos del Salado in Chile with a mountain bike on your back, and that's the world's highest volcano and second highest peak in all of the Americas. What are you focusing on in these situations, and where's your mind at these points?
I mean, something like the circumnavigation, the 80 days, I was, in my own head on the bike for 1,100 hours. So that's a lot of time, and you're sleep deprived. You're on the bike from 4 a.m. till 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, every single day for 2.5 months. As you say, riding the best part of 400 kilometers a day. So this is not like, I don't know, like a 45-minute cross-country race or, a crit race where you can psych yourself up. You can be zone 5, just absolutely riding on the limit all the time. You are thinking about everything. You have an insane amount of time in your own head, and necessarily there's a lot of time focused on the numbers, the performance, the ride. But clearly there's a lot of time during that day, 16, 17 hours on the bike every single day, to think every thought, think back, think forwards. And I think in our everyday lives, we never have that amount of time to really sort of be undistracted. And I think people struggle with that. I think people always assume that you get lonely and you get bored. Maybe it became from my formative years, not socializing very much and being homeschooled, but being comfortable in your own skin I'm a pretty social animal. I spend half my life, going out to events and standing on stage, and I'm very comfortable chatting like this. But ultimately, to be a really good ultra endurance bike rider, you've got to be very comfortable in your own head, and you've got to understand that, your deepest hopes and fears are going to come out, and you've got to deal with them, and you can't distract yourself. And I think the other element you brought in is when you're doing more expeditionary things. So like, I don't know, going through the high Arctic, rowing the Atlantic, free riding down the world's highest volcano, some of these other projects. With them, it's not just about performance in terms of racing, because there's nothing really exploratory about that. But when you're going into these sort of uncharted places, it brings out a different trepidation, a different fear, because you're doing something that nobody's ever done before. And that brings out a different insecurity. It brings out a different emotional reaction. It brings out that sense of like, I've done the planning, I know what I'm doing, but ultimately every step I take is into the unknown. And when you're in these far more remote environments, it becomes about how you can safely get yourself back out of there. You're constantly thinking about exposure, defined by how likely are things to go wrong. And if they do go wrong, how serious are the consequences? Because often you're beyond rescue in some of these places. And, that brings a different focus. So I always say to people when they come to me with their big ideas, I say two things. I say, shoot for the stars, but learn your trade. And I think that second bit's really important, because if you want to climb Everest, cycle around the world, row the Atlantic, I'll never stop you. But you've got to have done something to give you a reference point to what you're dreaming of. You can't just fall out of bed and do these things. So I've pretty systematically, since I was a 12-year-old kid pedaling across Scotland, built my resilience, built my physical and mental toolkit, understand how to take care of myself and those around me in incredibly remote, difficult situations. I don't always get it right, but ultimately, I'm not looking for a guide or somebody else to hold my hand in that environment. I can operate safely, and I can remain in a leadership space. I've seen people really fail. I've seen people really fail because they want to do these things, but when they get there, they realize the reality is a lot different to the dream. People often say to me, Mark, I'd love to do what you do. And I always say to them, I think you like the idea of what I do. I think you like the TV outtakes, because, the emotional journey when you are at 7,000 meters with a bike on your back, or 800 miles north of the Arctic Circle, facing polar bears and dangerous ice fields. I do enjoy these things, but kind of going back to our previous conversation, it's not a jump up and down, hip hip hooray, isn't this fun? It's I'm at that high stakes, pioneering place where I'm living out my biggest dreams, but my goodness, every decision matters, every action matters, and I've got a responsibility to myself and my team to get through this safely. And I think that's always front of mind.
Returning to the book, what can't this book teach you? Or what can't you learn from this book that you need to learn out on the bike?
I guess you've read it well, haven't you? That's my big disclaimer in the book. I mean, honestly, you read the first few pages and it basically says, I can tell you as much as I know, or I can make sense to, but none of this will make sense until you actually go and ride your bike. I mean, I think it makes sense conceptually, but there's so much about this which is about knowing yourself. And, you can read every book in the library, but it won't actually make you a better all-rounded bike rider until you go out and challenge yourself and learn yourself. So hopefully the book gives you a framework. It gives you a language. It can help you fast track some of the things that I've learned over 40 years on this planet. But, they won't in and of themselves give you the belief in your ability to operate in whatever your dream environment is. I'm not making this about volcanoes and cycling around the world. Your dream environment might simply be about, a Sunday ride with your buddies and being able to do something different from what you've done before. Whatever that metric for success is, it's about making it your own. So I loved writing the book. I loved spending that time with Dr. Jim Taylor. And I like the way they put the book together because it's very honest. But it gives you a language. It gives you I think to read a book about psychology, you've already got to be a little bit interested in, who you are and how you operate. Ironically, I'm not a great fan of sort of self-help type books in general as a genre. And so I saw this book more as sort of my opportunity just to not coach people or tell people what to do, but just to think out loud in terms of what I've learned over the last decades and how I operate under stress. And hopefully some of that makes sense to people in a way that they go, yeah, okay, I can take that and use that. And then they can go and experience something which, when they're experiencing it, goes, right, okay, that relates to being in charge of your emotions, or that relates to, identity, or, there's just a quicker way of understanding it. If you've read a book like this, it gives you a toolkit.
I find that fascinating because you say you're not a fan of self-help, and this book could be classified, or you could put it in that section of the library. And, there's even sections on breathing, which in some self-help books sounds a little woo-woo, but I find that this book is more grounded, and not that self-help isn't practical, but there's a certain practicality about this book and a certain no-nonsense about it. And I think it is the part about you, as you mentioned, giving you the language. And what I find interesting there is I've had, say, bike fits, and not only have they helped me in my position on the bike, but a good fitter will help me understand what's going right, what's going wrong, why do I feel that way, and it gives me a certain body literacy. And your book, I feel, is giving you the psychological literacy.
I think that's fair, and I certainly don't want to undermine an entire genre. I guess where I struggle is sort of the theory of performance. I mean, I remember when I was an undergrad reading economics, a lot of economic theory doesn't really set you up to run a business. And I guess the same analogy works for a lot of, in the real world, a lot of coaching or frameworks which work well as theories, but are pretty hard to make sense of in a real world environment. They don't feel like they're tailored to you. So, I mean, I see it all the time in businesses with sort of management consultant approach. This is the playbook for what you need to do. And then you're like, well, okay, what am I actually meant to do with that? That sounds very inspiring, but what does that mean? So the tone we tried to get with the Complete Guide to Cycling Psychology is, look, here's some personal reflections. Here's some situations I've been in. This is Dr. Jim Taylor making sense of them in terms of that mental toolkit. And then some simple quiz questions, because there's a bunch of quizzes in the book in terms of helping you better understand yourself. Just try and make sense of it. Does this make sense? What elements can you take into your life? And I mean, my anecdotes are exactly that. I don't expect people to be riding alongside giraffes in the middle of Botswana or capsizing in the middle of the Atlantic or whatever the hell it was. But ultimately, they're memorable. And, going back through the millennia, human beings learn through storytelling. And if a story makes sense to you and you can then translate it into your own environment, then you can do something with it, as opposed to some daft theory of psychology where you go, okay, well, that's great, but what do I actually do with it?
So I did read your book closely. So not only did I catch those little things about what maybe it can or can't teach you, but as an editor, I couldn't help but notice the word further and farther. And you even bring that up in near the beginning of the book. So let's get a bit grammar nerd. What's going on with further and farther and your feelings with those two words?
I know where you're going with this question. Farther is grammatically correct. I was advised by the GCN crew that we needed to make this a bit more conversational. And even though farther is correct, further was, I guess, a little bit, farther made it sound a little bit Victorian. And we had such a funny round, this conversation went on for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And eventually they just said, look, we're making this decision on it. Nothing you can say, crack on. It became a running joke. But you're right. You're absolutely right. And I hope anyone who reads the cover will have a wry smile and realize that when you write a book, it is a collective. And I think it's beautifully put together. I think the imagery really helps in a book like that. It's something that you don't need to go cover to cover on. You can jump in, and it can be a bit of a coffee table book as opposed to a bedtime story. But there's an amazing process. I don't think people realize how much time goes into creating books. I've written 6 books in my life, and they really are labors of love. And and a huge time commitment, but it's never just the author on the front cover. There's an amazing collective. And as an editor yourself, you'll appreciate how tricky that is sometimes to, get the focus right and make sure that it moves along at the right pace for the reader.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it's every magazine article is a collective endeavor for sure over here. And I just want to, for the non-word nerds out there, farther is used for distance and further is used for degree. So make note there. That's the end of the grammar section. Oh, by the way, I didn't notice the word whiskey at all in the book, but I'm sure you and I would have spelled whiskey the same way. That's with no extra E.
Yeah, and I wouldn't suggest whiskey and cycling at the same time. But if you want to see a great bit of YouTube content, it's Hank, James Losley William, a great buddy of mine, and myself exploring Islay, the beautiful island of Islay off the west coast of Scotland, for its famous distillery. So it was I think it's called Gravel and Whiskey, spelt the proper way, and it's an exploration of the island of Islay and its amazing whiskey heritage. So check that one out once you've finished listening to this pod.
Excellent. I would like to change gears, yes, pun intended, to bike design. You have been working with the Montreal-based company Argon 18. You've had input into the design of their new Krypton all-road bike. Before we get into some of the specifics of the bike, can you tell me what riding a bike for many days in a row, no matter whose bike, but what riding a bike many days in a row can tell you about its design?
Well, I think a lot of bike design comes from quite an engineering perspective. I would describe myself clearly as an ultra-endurance athlete who has a lot of experience of what can go wrong. So there's two sides of training. There's the physical fitness training, and then there's the conditioning. Conditioning is nothing actually to do with your physical strength, although the two are related, if that makes sense. So my point is, when you do multi-day, multi-week, multi-month stuff like I do, you build a deep understanding of your connection with the bike in a way that you perhaps wouldn't if you were just going on a much shorter ride. So what I really appreciated with the Argon 18 team is having a completely different perspective when I was working with engineers and designers who were very much coming at it from the perspective of, clearly the geometry, the aerodynamics, the functionality, the tire clearance, all the rest of it. And I was able to come in with, I guess in a very similar way to the book, real life experience in terms of what I would want it to do as an ultra endurance sort of specialist. It's an interesting concept because the new Krypton, people often talk about N+1, a new bike for every, you always need another bike for something else. But what if N equaled 1? What if you could have one bike that did it all? Now, I know that's a complete fiction and we all dream of having many bikes, but if you could have one bike to do it all without compromising too much, what would it be? That is the challenge. And I think as an ultra-endurance adventure bike rider who's done a huge amount of road, off-road, and everything in between, penny farthing racing and all sorts of nonsense, I think it gives me a really good all-rounded experience to be able to design bikes for the future. And then when you meet a team like the Argon 18 team who are so passionate about performance and the pedigree of the bike, but maybe haven't ridden a bike in anger the way I have over the miles I have and the environments I have, it was a really challenging conversation. I hope they really appreciated a different perspective on what they were doing. And I got a lot out of it. There's a hell of a lot I don't know about bike design, but I do feel like I had a completely different perspective, which led to a series of super interesting conversations in terms of what that frame set should be and how it should ride.
Are there any features on the bike that you can point to and say, yep, I had a hand in that right there?
Well, there's no right to reply here, so I can just claim the lot, and there's nothing that they can do about it. So the whole team, I did the lot. I designed the whole bike. It's all known.
Oh, fantastic job! I have one in the living room right now. It looks great.
Thank you so much. Yeah. No, my goodness. I refer back to half an hour ago. I was one of an amazing team, and what did I have an input into? I had the old Krypton, which is a very different bike, and felt that the front end needed tightening up in terms of how it handled. You want something which is comfortable over endurance, but, handles well, especially out the saddle in the climbs, under hard braking, and cornering at the same time. You know, those aspects that you see in the Sun Pro, which is their sort of pro race frame set. How would you bring some of those elements into a bike which has, 40 mil clearance and a bit more all-road ability? So there was lots of conversations about the front end, the geometry. You'll notice the much slenderer forks. It looks beautiful. It rides nicely on the climb. And the rear triangle, that sort of slightly compacted rear triangle, again, performance at the heart of that. How do you get that geometry right for a wider, for a light gravel setup as well? Lots of conversations around that. Hey, I'll tell you something that I wasn't a fan of, that I had to be convinced of. So I'm certainly not taking the credit for it all. I wasn't convinced that they should have the integrated tool space underneath the bottle cage.
Oh, really? Because I immediately thought, oh, this is practical for the ultra endurance person.
And it is. And I'm a massive fan now. But I think that's a really good example of an iterative process where you need to listen to each other and acknowledge that you're not always right. So I saw that and I thought, it's a bit gadgety. I'm not sure I would use it. I wanted the bike, despite the fittings on it, to be able to go bike packing and put fenders on it and the rest of it. I wanted the bike to look sleek. I wanted it to look high performance. I didn't want it to be like a Christmas tree with lots of stuff hanging off it. So this idea of having an integrated tool space, I needed convinced. And there was probably 6 weeks of conversations where the design team came back with a prototype. And, eventually I said, look, that looks great. And if that works reliably, it doesn't just become anything that you add onto the bike like that. I want it to age as well as the rest of the bike does. So there was a lot of challenge around that. And I feel my job with Argon 18 is sort of to be a friend, but a challenger, to be outside enough, not just to agree with everyone. And then ultimately, to respect their experience. They're far better bike designers than I am. And to sometimes realize that there's things that they're trying to do that I just don't get and I need educated on. So stuff that I can definitely point to and go, I pushed that hard and I'm very proud of it. But there's definitely other stuff that I need to be convinced of. But all along, it was just a really robust conversation. And I love companies that have that very in-house, we do this ourselves, we test it ourselves. It's a discerning choice. If you ride an Argon 18, it's somebody that knows their bikes. There's nothing wrong with the big brands, but it is a discerning choice. And the thought process that's gone on into the frame design and build is incredibly laborious. It's super geeky and it brings out a different part of my brain that I don't use most of the time. So I enjoyed it.
Where will you take your Argon 18 Krypton next?
Oh, good question. Very good question. I think it's the perfect bike for what I'm going to do this year and next, because the last couple of years has been pretty hardcore time trialing. So I smashed the North Coast 500 record, a 500-mile route around the north of Scotland not too long ago. I was out taking on Race Across America last summer, and it's all about being ultra endurance time trial. I've loved that period in my career, but it is quite one-dimensional. Just get your head down, skin suit, race. The thing I love about the Krypton, which I think is the next chapter, is it does have that beautiful all-road. I want to go back to journeys that have got a better balance between the performance and the place. Time trialing, you kind of lose the place. So my favorite expedition, I think, in my entire career is the length of Africa, Cairo to Cape Town, because I was still on my own, trying to figure out where I was going to sleep each night, where's my next meal, and all the rest of it. So the Krypton's kind of the perfect bike for that. And I've got a short list at the moment of where I want to go. I'm talking to GCN about some big projects. I'd love to go to some places. So here's some of my bucket list. Lebanon, I've got some beautiful, beautiful riding and climbing over there. I'd like to do some more big rides in Central America as well. And actually, there's some stuff closer to home, up the Norwegian coast and even here in the UK. So we're developing content all the time for the channel, and obviously I do stuff outside of GCN. So yeah, watch this space, but it'll be a great toy for the next couple of years.
Mark, thank you for your time, and I look forward to following your adventures wherever they may show up. And yeah, thanks again for this conversation.
Pleasure. Great to chat.
And that's the episode. It's written and edited by me, Matthew Piaro. I had some help from Matt Hansen.
How come I don't get to do the outros? How come it's always you?
It's my job. All right. Well, you want to do it next time? Let me hear you say, and that's the episode.
And that's the episode.
I think you're making fun of me again.
He did the music too. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, who did the music?
Adam Killick.
Oh, that's right. This episode is produced by Adam Killick. And he did the music too, as Matt just said. I also had help from web editor, mountain bike editor, Terry McCall. Thanks also to Ontario Creates for its support. Okay, Matt, I'm going to go put that cushion on the Trek fetch, and then maybe we don't tell Trek, but you drive me around the block on that thing.
Okay, sounds fun. It'll be like a rickshaw.
We just can't break it. That'd be bad.
Done. Let's go.
Everybody, if you have a Trek fetch, don't overload it. Ride safe, and we'll talk to you later.